So, as the title says, this video is going to be a summary of the entire Black Ops 1 campaign. So before we go anywhere and start breaking down the campaign into each individual mission, we have to be aware that the whole campaign is based basically in one room. Mason has been captured and he is being interrogated, and it seems that he's undergoing some form of shock therapy to try and get the information out of him. Now the interrogators are looking for one specific bit of information, and that is what the numbers mean. Now the way Mason tries to understand what's going on is by reliving past memories, also known as transmissions. So the campaign that then follows is just Mason reliving some of the memories that he's been through to try and work out what the hell is going on and what the numbers mean. So the campaign starts in Cuba on April 17th, 1961. Mason is with the S.O.G team, Woods and Bowman, and their objective is to assassinate Fidel Castro. After escaping the opening bar fight scene, Woods, Mason and Bowman find themselves ready to storm Castro's compound. After a long drawn out gunfight with Castro's defenders, they manage to make their way up to his bedroom, where they find Castro holding a woman as a human shield. Mason manages to get a bullet off and shoot Castro in the head. However, the woman he was using as a human shield is also hostile, and they have to take her out as well as she pulls a gun on Woods and Mason. So with their objective complete, Castro is now dead. They then attempt to escape the compound. They do this by jumping on an aeroplane and getting down a runway. Unfortunately, they can't fully take off because the bottom of the runway is blocked by the defending enemies. Mason decides to sacrifice himself, jump off the plane and jump on a turret where he can take out the roadblock and let the S.O.G team escape to safety. In doing so, Mason is captured and knocked unconscious. When Mason regains consciousness, he finds himself on a dock with 3 men stood above him, one to Mason's surprise, Fidel Castro. So the Castro Mason had killed in the compound was actually a fake. He was a double. And the real Castro is still alive. Now the other 2 men that Castro is stood with are the 2 main antagonists for Black Ops 1, Kravchenko and Dragovich. Castro gives Mason to Dragovich, tells Dragovich he can do whatever he wants with the American, and Dragovich condemns Mason to Vorkuta Soviet prison, also known as a gulag.
Dragovich sure did.
And this leads us nicely on to chapter 2, which is named Vorkuta. The date is October 6, 1963. So Mason has been in the Vorkuta gulag for about a year now, where he meets Viktor Reznov. The opening scene of the mission starts off with Mason and Reznov fighting. This is kind of a game that the guards like to play with the prisoners. They like to put them up against each other and make them fight themselves. So a guard comes over to finish Mason off when Reznov distracts him and Mason gets the kill on the guard, meaning that they can now start to hatch their escape plan that Reznov has been planning for a while. So again, after a lengthy fight to freedom, the only 2 that manage to escape properly are Mason and Reznov. They do this by jumping on motorcycles. They manage to ride to some form of freedom before they jump on a vehicle which has a turret. Mason jumps on the back, so he manages to take out some of the people chasing him. Because he's on the back, he has a little bit more freedom to move around. They drive up next to a moving train where Mason jumps onto the train, expecting Reznov to do the same. However, Reznov does not. He then slows the car down and is recaptured by the guards in Vorkuta.
Not for me! Reznov!
So this leads us on to chapter 3, which is set 1 month later on November 10th, 1963. Mason is then summoned to the Pentagon where he meets his new contract CIA agent, Jason Hudson. As Mason enters the Pentagon, he starts to feel extremely uncomfortable and starts to see numbers and hear odd noises. Mason tells the interrogator that when he was in the Pentagon, he felt like he was dreaming and that he kept quoting Reznov's steps to freedom, which were part of Reznov's escape plan in Vorkuta. The interrogator lets Mason know that he was feeling unwell because he was getting close to his objective and that whatever it was working. The interrogator then lets Mason know that the interrogator was also in the Pentagon at the time Mason was there. Mason is taken into an old part of the Pentagon where he meets President Kennedy. Mason starts to act even more oddly and then he imagines himself pulling a gun on JFK. He then snaps back to reality and speaks to JFK normally, where he is given the task of taking out Dragovich. Mason is tasked with Operation Flashpoint. So chapter 4, Executive Order, takes place on November 17th, 1963. Mason and the S.O.G team are tasked to take out the Russian space program and eradicate their long-range missile project. Along with this, he's also tasked to take out the Ascension group, a group of defected Nazi scientists that co-opted with the Russians after the end of World War II to help the Russians with their space program. During Mason's flashback of Chapter 4, The Executive Order, he mentions Grigory Weaver, a double agent tasked with the mission to sabotage a rocket, but something went wrong. So the mission starts with Mason and Woods being a few miles out from the rocket. They notice that Grigory Weaver, the double agent, has been compromised and been captured. His capturer is Kravchenko, like we saw in the first mission, Dragovich's right-hand man. Kravchenko is torturing Weaver, trying to get a response from the S.O.G team. So after taking out two unsuspecting guards, Woods and Mason disguise themselves as the Russian soldiers and make their way towards the rocket and the military base. They meet up with their S.O.G comrades, including Bowman, and storm the facility. After some intense fighting and getting the high ground, Mason then ziplines into a bunker where Weaver is being kept and tortured. He bursts through the window, killing Weaver's torturers. Weaver is then saved and he is fine to carry on and escape the space program area. But they can't forget to take out the Ascension group on the way. And despite Weaver, Bowman, Woods all knowing the objective of finding the Ascension group, taking them out and destroying the rocket, Mason is convinced that his sole mission is to take out Dragovich. The Ascension group managed to launch the rocket. Mason finds a guided missile which takes out the rocket and it successfully blows up. And on their way out of the facility, they try and take out as many Ascension scientists as they possibly can. The mission ends with a load of stills basically explaining that Dragovich was nowhere to be seen and that he'd already escaped. They manage to find Dragovich's limo, they chase it down and burn it. Woods is sure that they got Dragovich, but Mason did not confirm the kill.
You confirm the kill.
Trust me, that rat bast's a fucking charcoal briquette.
So moving on to Chapter 5, there is a massive gap in Mason's memories of about 4.5 to 5 years. So Chapter 5 begins January 21st, 1968, and not a lot really happens in this chapter. Hudson and Mason are taken to Vietnam where they meet up with Woods at a military compound. The original mission for the S.O.G and the CIA agents are to make it to Hue City, but there is a siege on Khe Sanh where their military base is, so the operatives decide to stay back and defend Khe Sanh with the American military. So this chapter kind of just sets the scene for the coming Vietnam flashbacks that Mason is having. So Chapter 6 begins on February 2nd, 1968. The Tet Offensive is said to be the beginning of the end for the US during the Vietnam War. Despite Hue City being lost by the Americans, Mason is adamant he must get to the MACV compound in Hue City in order to find a certain dossier and to see if he could find the Russian defector who handed himself in. The defector has intel on Dragovich, and obviously Mason is still obsessed with finding and getting Dragovich. So they head into Hue City to find this dossier and the defector. After entering the compound and fighting off the defending enemies, Mason breaches a door where he is attacked close combat by an enemy. He is then saved by a Russian defector who happens to be Reznov. Reznov hands Mason the dossier and they begin to fight their way out of the building. Reznov informs Mason that Dragovich has a plan to attack the West, and Reznov reminds Mason how important the task of killing Dragovich is. So the team, Mason, Woods, Bowman and Reznov, then have to fight their way out of the compound to an extraction point where the helicopter arrives and only takes the injured soldiers away, leaving the S.O.G team and Reznov stranded there in Hue City. Luckily, the extraction point is on a dock area, so the US bring in a boat to get the soldiers out of there. Once they've escaped, Reznov then informs Mason that the Vietnamese are being helped by the Russians. The dossier that they collected contains information on all of Dragovich's right-hand men, Kravchenko, Steiner and Clark. Kravchenko being his right-hand military man, Steiner and Clark being two scientists that have been helping him with the project. The interrogator reminds Mason that he knows all of these people already, and they are the masterminds behind Project Nova, also known as Nova 6. This is where Dr. Clark is introduced, an English chemist working for Dragovich. He is the chemical engineer who helped design the chemical formula for Nova 6. And after the CIA finding out this information, Hudson, Mason's handler, is then sent to Kowloon City to interrogate Dr. Clark.
Why keep asking? You already know everything.
So this moves nicely on to chapter 7. This occurs on February 9th, 1968. This is where the story seems to take a break of intensity and you relive a Hudson memory instead of a Mason memory. So you're playing as Hudson. Hudson and Weaver make their way through Kowloon City to find Dr. Clark, the English scientist that's been working on Project Nova. They manage to find him and Dr. Clark reveals that he was hired to help stabilize certain volatile compounds in Nova 6, a biological weapon. The mission seems a little bit drawn out and slightly pointless with regards to the story, but it does confirm that Dragovich is working on a biochemical weapon known as Nova 6, and that the base for this project is in Mount Yamantar in the Ural Mountains in Russia. And here Clark reveals that Steiner and Dragovich are in talk about numbers, the kind of numbers that their plan relies on. The Russian Special Forces, the Spetsnaz, are also in Kowloon City looking for Dr. Clark because they know he's compromised and he's going to give information about Nova 6. So Hudson, Weaver and Dr. Clark then try and escape Kowloon City, fighting off the incoming Spetsnaz. They do this by basically free-running Kowloon City, jumping from roof to roof. They make one jump that Dr. Clark doesn't make. He's hanging on by a thread. Hudson tries to catch him, and as Hudson is holding on to Dr. Clark, he then asks quickly about the numbers, to which Dr. Clark is then shot in the head before he reveals anything that he knows. Hudson and Weaver continue to escape, and he's picked up in an extraction van, which is pretty similar to the stuff we see in Cold War. Hudson confirms that they're making their way to Mount Yamantar in Russia in search for the Nazi scientist Steiner.
We're going to Russia, Mount Yamantar.
And as we're not on the topic of actually reliving some of Mason's memories, I think Treyarch thought this was a good time to put this chapter in, Chapter 8, Project Nova, which gives a good explanation of the origins of Project Nova and Nova 6. The mission opens with Mason talking to Reznov about the origins of Nova 6 and how Reznov knows what happens whilst they were in Vorkuta. So you find yourself reliving a Reznov memory where he's tasked with the mission to retrieve Dr. Steiner, and this mission is being ordered by Kravchenko and Dragovich, who were once members of the Russian army. Steiner has offered cooperation to their cause, but we don't know what the cause is, but we can kind of assume that it's Project Nova or Nova 6. Upon battling through the military base that Steiner is in World War II and fighting off the defending SS, Steiner is captured by Reznov and Steiner tells Reznov to take him to Dragovich. Dragovich and Steiner seem to have some secret deal of some sort and they speak like old friends. Steiner then takes Dragovich to a nearby frozen ship that is stuck and says the Nova 6 is inside. Reznov's crew are tasked with going into the ship and finding the Nova 6, while Dragovich and Steiner hang behind. So once they find it, Dragovich wants to see the effects of Nova 6 firsthand, so they decide to put Reznov's crew in some gas chambers and use Nova 6. Half of Reznov's crew go down due to the Nova 6 poisoning, but by the time they're about to poison Reznov, British commandos storm the ship looking for Nova 6. Dragovich, Steiner and Kravchenko manage to escape, leaving Reznov to deal with the invading British commandos. After fighting his way off the ship, Reznov manages to destroy the ship and tries to run, but obviously he is then captured and sent to Vorkuta Gulag. So after those two background stories, we go back to the main timeline of Mason's memories, and on February 9th, 1968, we start with Chapter 9, Victor Charlie. Mason and the S.O.G team are back on foot in Laos, Vietnam, and looking for evidence of the Soviets in Vietnam and are trying to eliminate Kravchenko. The S.O.G team have been shot down and they've landed in a swamp where the helicopter begins to sink with Woods and Mason on. Woods and Mason are struggling to escape the sinking helicopter, where Reznov randomly appears to help the two escape. After fighting off the initial invaders, Woods and Mason then swim upriver. They meet back up with Bowman to discuss their mission objective. The mission is to find a military outpost under command of Kravchenko. Mason and Woods continue their stealth operations by planting underwater explosives around the nearest village. Once they've rendezvoused just outside the village with the other members of the S.O.G team, they blow the explosives and begin to assault the village. After clearing the village, they find a rat tunnel to which Mason and Operator Swift are sent down. During Mason and Swift's investigation of this rat tunnel, Reznov randomly appears again, scaring Mason and Swift. Swift seems really concerned with Mason's behaviour during the rat hole investigation and tells Mason to basically keep his shit together. While Swift is not concentrating and focusing on Mason's behaviour, he is attacked by an enemy and unfortunately stabbed to death. Mason then deals with the enemy and continues the investigation of the rat tunnel on his own. Once he comes to an opening, Reznov randomly appears again in the rat tunnel and confirms the sign of Soviet presence. They continue through their investigation and manage to find Kravchenko's military command center, where the tunnel begins to collapse and Mason and Reznov are forced to escape. Once they come out of the rat tunnel, they find themselves on a cliff face where the S.O.G team luckily arrive via helicopter and Mason jumps to safety. Now here, the outcome of Reznov is left unanswered, and then Mason comes back to reality in the interrogation room, where the interrogator reminds us that Reznov is not to be trusted and that Mason must focus on the numbers. This is where the interrogator reminds Mason that the numbers are linked to a broadcast station and that Mason has been brainwashed. So this leads on to chapter 10. 2 days later, on February 11th, 1968, the S.O.G team continue their search for Kravchenko, heading north up the Mekong River towards Laos. Hudson contacts Mason to inform him that a Soviet cargo plane carrying a shipment of Nova 6 has been shot down by the CIA near Laos, and that the S.O.G team are to investigate and try and retrieve the Nova 6. Once they get there and find the crash site, the Nova 6 has all but gone. The only thing they find is a map of Kravchenko's compound. In the wake of fighting over the crash site with the invading enemies, Mason finds himself in the wrong side of a hanging plane, which seems to break off whilst he's in the cockpit, and he falls to the ground inside the cockpit. He's knocked unconscious by this. When he wakes up, he sees two men walking towards him. These men happen to be Kravchenko and Dragovich. Mason is then captured by Dragovich for the second time, and the whole unit of the S.O.G is presumed dead by the CIA. So with the S.O.G team out the picture, Mason, Woods, Bowman, Hudson has no choice but to carry on the mission just with the CIA operatives. So 1 week later, on February the 18th, 1968, chapter 11 begins, named W.M.D. So again, you're back playing as Hudson, and obviously Hudson learned from Dr. Clark in Kowloon City that the main base for the Nova 6 project was in Mount Yamantar in the Ural Mountains in Russia. So that's where the CIA are heading. Because of obviously the environment and the snow and the weather, they need help from a Blackbird, so some of the gameplay is in the Blackbird guiding which way the CIA team needs to move. After assaulting the massive military complex in search for Dr. Steiner, they finally make their way to the control room, and to their despair, they find that no one is there. However, Dr. Steiner knows that they are inside the control room and starts to jam their radios, taking over their signal. Steiner then, via the infiltrated communication, tells the CIA agents that the US has been infiltrated by multiple sleeper cells who are ready to release the Nova 6 once they have the correct signal. Steiner also lets Hudson know that the only person that can put an end to this is Steiner himself, and he tells him that he is on Rebirth Island in the Aral Sea. Steiner also tells Hudson that Dragovich uses number sequence to communicate with the sleeper cells on US soil, and that these numbers are all broadcast from one station. The flashback ends, and then we're back to Mason in the interrogation room, and the interrogator reminds Mason that whilst he spent his time in Vorkuta, Dragovich actually programmed Mason to be able to translate the codes. The interrogator is becoming more and more frustrated with Mason's inability to remember where the broadcast station is, and then in untimely fashion, Mason then passes back out, and we're back to reliving a memory of Laos in the Vietnam War.
You know about the sleeper cells.
I'm trying to help you.
Dragovich uses number sequences to communicate with the sleeper cells. Those numbers are broadcast from one location, Mason.
Why the hell do you think that I know where it is?
You're in Vorkuta, Mason. We know what happens at Vorkuta. They programmed you. You can translate the codes.
But Reznov was never...
Stop! Mason, we are on the brink of war. Where is the broadcast station? Where is the broadcast station?
Dragovich had us like rats in cages.
Mason! We're losing him!
We are all brothers. We are all prisoners.
So chapter 12, Payback, starts on the February 19th, 1968. The mission opens with Woods and Mason trapped inside cages that are submerged in water. So obviously they aren't dead, they are alive, but they have been captured and are prisoners of war. So this is quite a famous mission in the Call of Duty franchise. Mason is taken to a table in an enemy den where he is sat opposite Bowman, and they are about to play Russian roulette. Bowman refuses and defies the Russian and the Vietnamese commanders, and then is beaten to death by a Spetsnaz operative. Woods is then brought to the table, sat opposite Mason, and they're forced to play Russian roulette. Woods goes first, guns to his head, pulls the trigger, and luckily the chamber is empty. Woods then kind of notifies to Mason that he is ready. Mason fakes pulling the gun on himself and in fact turns it on one of the enemies, and luckily the chamber is loaded, pulls the trigger, and then they start fighting. They manage to pretty much kill off everyone in the den apart from the Spetsnaz operator who tries to escape, and after a long drawn out battle through these tunnels in Vietnam, they manage to catch the Russian and kill him in revenge for killing Bowman. After exiting the tunnel, Woods and Mason find there is a Hind helicopter which they can steal and try to escape. While they're flying this helicopter and escaping, they try and destroy as many military outposts as they possibly can, causing absolute carnage across Vietnam. They then have to fight off 2 enemy Hinds before they land slightly south to their positioning to try and infiltrate Kravchenko's base. So as they're advancing towards Kravchenko's base, they manage to find a group of POWs. One of them happens to be Reznov, who obviously was captured after they exited the rat tunnel 10 days prior to this mission. Reznov leads Woods and Masons deeper into the underground bunker where they eventually find Kravchenko, and leaves Woods and Mason to deal with Kravchenko. After a struggle and a fight, Kravchenko beats Mason to the ground and Woods comes from behind, stabbing Kravchenko in the chest. Kravchenko then manages to pull the pin on an explosive vest, forcing Woods to push him and Kravchenko out of a window where the explosion goes off, and unfortunately Woods dies along with Kravchenko.
What?
So, meaning Woods and Bowman are now KIA, leaving Mason to be the only member of the S.O.G team remaining. Back in the room with the interrogator reminds Mason that he's the only survivor, and they argue that Reznov survived too. Mason believes Reznov survived, the interrogator does not. The interrogator is adamant that Mason is the only survivor and Reznov is out of the picture. So this leads us on to chapter 13, Rebirth, which starts on February 23rd, 1968, 4 days after they've taken out Kravchenko. After escaping Laos, Mason is deemed to go rogue, and he is said to be continuing his mission on his own of killing Steiner. Hudson and the CIA are already on their way to Rebirth Island to capture Steiner. The mission opens with Reznov and Mason quietly making their way to Steiner's office at the Rebirth facility. After killing off the defending enemies, they finally make their way to the control panel, or the office, where Steiner is working, where they find Dr. Steiner alone. And this is where Reznov takes over the interrogation of Steiner and starts to beat him. Reznov's motivation is made pretty clear here. He does not care about Nova 6 anymore, he just wants his revenge on Dr. Steiner and what they did to him and his team. So just before Steiner is executed, the mission then swaps to the eyes of Hudson, and Hudson is making his way up to Steiner's control panel office thing, whatever he is in, with Weaver and the CIA team. After a long battle against the defending enemies, and battling through a Nova 6 outbreak on the island, Hudson and Weaver manage to make it to Steiner's control panel area wherever he's working, and they only find one person attacking Steiner: Mason. Mason is the only person taking revenge on Steiner. There is no sign of Reznov. Weaver and Hudson break through the bulletproof glass, but it's too late. Mason shoots Steiner in the head, and then shoots Weaver for trying to stop him. Hudson knocks Mason out, and Weaver confirms Steiner is dead, and also Weaver is going to be okay. Weaver then warns Hudson that they need to find Reznov before it's too late, and Hudson reveals that Reznov was never anywhere near the complex, and it's all been inside Mason's head. With Steiner dead, Mason is the only person who can link the numbers to the broadcast station and stop the transmission of the sleeper cells.
What did they do to you in Vorkuta, Mason?
With Steiner dead, Mason's our only link to the numbers broadcasts.
We need to bring them back.
Let's go.
So the story picks back up with chapter 14, Revelation, on February 25th, 1968. Time is running out. Hudson opens the door to the interrogation room and tells Weaver to head for the nuclear bunker. This means that Hudson and Weaver have been Mason's interrogators for the whole time. So Hudson and Mason now have to make it to the bunker themselves. When Hudson is undoing Mason's straps in the chair, he punches Hudson in the face, knocking him out. Mason then tries to escape, and he's kind of having this weird hallucination revelation kind of situation where he's seeing numbers, he's hearing voices, he's hearing quotes, he's seeing things, and it's all a bit of a mess.
The subject has been successfully implanted with the knowledge to translate the number sequences.
So, what is the problem?
His responses to our orders have been sporadic, unpredictable. He shows a remarkable resilience.
Why?
He is unusual. Atypical. Few men possess such will. Our other test subjects have been far more successful.
If he will not follow the orders embedded in the numbers, then he is of no use to me.
Mason is making his way towards an unknown destination where Hudson catches up with him and knocks him out. Mason is then having flashbacks of Vorkuta and Reznov, and as he wakes back up, Hudson reveals to him that Dragovich has brainwashed him. He also reveals that Reznov has not been with Mason at all throughout this whole campaign. It's all been inside Mason's head. Hudson reveals that Dragovich had programmed Mason to kill JFK, which kind of explains why there was that flashback, or Mason imagining assassinating JFK where they met in the Pentagon earlier on in the story. Hudson also reveals that Reznov had kind of sabotaged all of these plans by enforcing on Mason that the only objective was to kill Steiner, Clark, Kravchenko and Dragovich. Mason starts to come to some form of realization on what's going on, and then he starts having proper flashbacks where he's remembering everything that he can to do with the broadcast station where these numbers are coming from. He has a flashback to when he was captured by Dragovich the first time, where he saw Kravchenko, Dragovich and Castro. He noticed the ship they were stood next to was called the Rusaka. Mason remembers what Dragovich said about the broadcast station being permanently around the US and it only being from one location, and Mason realizes that the broadcast station is actually from the Rusaka ship. He obviously tells Hudson this, and this leads us on to the final mission in Call of Duty Black Ops Chapter 15, Redemption. On February 26, 1968, Hudson, Mason and the CIA make their way to Cuba in an attempt to intercept the Rusaka. The final mission opens with an aerial attack on the ship from the chopper gunners whilst protecting a team that have boarded the ship. After fighting their way down to the belly of the ship, they are disappointed to find nothing. Mason is aware that there is more to the ship than they thought. The broadcast station is actually under the ship, beneath the water. Weaver is then sent back to call in an airstrike on the ship to blow it up. Mason, Hudson and a few CIA operatives dive down beneath the ship to find a supply station for the Soviet submarine fleet. This is where the broadcasts have been coming from. They infiltrate the station, they defeat the defending Russian soldiers and manage to find the broadcast room. Mason finds the control panel where he begins to decode the numbers, but there is an explosion that knocks Mason through a hole in the floor. As Mason is trying to clamber up and climb back through the hole towards the control panel, Dragovich appears. Dragovich pulls a gun on Mason, but then Hudson saves the day by shooting Dragovich in the shoulder. As Dragovich turns to attack Hudson, Mason pulls him through the hole that he is hanging on and they fall to the lower deck. They then struggle while Mason is trying to strangle and choke Dragovich. Mason is obviously distressed and he is shouting about all the bad things Dragovich did to him, where Mason shouts, "You even tried to make me kill my own president," where Dragovich looks him in the eyes with a smirk on his face and replies, "Tried." Mason then chokes Dragovich to death, leaving him at the bottom of the ocean.
Come on, Mason!
And then Mason and Hudson then escape, swimming to the surface. They find Weaver on a boat and it is clear that the overall mission has been completed. A fleet of US warships and fighter jets are seen on screen. The mission is done, Nova 6 has been stopped and Dragovich is dead. So that is the whole story of Call of Duty Black Ops. As you can hear, my voice is starting to go now. I've been doing this commentary for more than 49 minutes, but there is a tiny bit on the end of this story. The ending cutscenes show how the numbers may have correlated to the assassination of JFK. The final still of the campaign shows Mason stood in the crowd next to JFK just before his assassination, leaving the question open: did Mason carry out his intended programming that Dragovich wanted to assassinate JFK?
Ascension.
So there we have it, guys. I'm not sure how long this video is going to end up once it's been edited and condensed down, but that is the complete story of Call of Duty Black Ops 1 in its entirety. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you made it this far, fantastic. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, let me know by dropping a like on it down below. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this type of video. Do you want to see more of it on the channel? And as always, feel free to subscribe to the channel for all of the latest Call of Duty news, tips and tricks, how-tos, class setups, everything Black Ops Cold War, and much more.
Viva la revolución!
Any last words, Mr. President?
Yes, Jack. Any superlative words of inspiration for our humble troops?
Do not pray for easy lives, my friends. Pray to be stronger men.